If you've been trying to manifest abundance, but you still feel stuck in scarcity, lack, fear, or emotional bracing, this episode is going to help you understand the trauma pattern beneath it. If manifesting seems like it only works temporarily or not at all, there's probably a deeper reason than mindset. In this episode, we're exploring why manifestation culture can keep people stuck in a trauma loop, especially when the deeper wound of scarcity has never been healed. If you grew up with trauma conditioning around the scarcity of love, support, or other survival resources, this episode will help you understand why scarcity keeps repeating and what deeper healing actually asks of you. Pretty much everything that you hear about manifesting teaches some version of the same process. You redirect your mind from lack to abundance. And yes, conscious redirection can be useful. Your willpower matters, and it's important to develop self-discipline to regulate yourself in the moment. That can help in certain moments when you're activated, when your nervous system is in the fight or flight. But for many people, that conscious redirection only creates a surface level fix because it doesn't reach the root of the pattern. The uncomfortable truth is that manifestation is often used as a coping mechanism. Instead of helping us truly heal, manifestation can become another way to avoid the deeper fear, grief, helplessness, and insecurity underneath the scarcity. It's the same kind of coping mechanism that helps us avoid the stuff that we don't want to deal with. That's when the survival reflex is trying to secure manifestation through force. High performance, achievement, success, these are all great, but they can also be high functioning forms of escape. That's why these habits appear to be totally different than escaping through food, alcohol, or other substances and behaviors that are more obviously unhealthy. I was originally going to do this ninth installment of the topic of escapism as part of the 9-part mini series on the emotional and behavioral anchors that weigh us down in life and relationships. But I've actually been talking about escapism as a generality quite a bit during season 2 of the podcast. So I wanted to create this episode on a form of escapism that's easily overlooked. I dug a little deeper for a particular form of escapism that I think is going to really speak to this community, to anyone who experienced trauma conditioning in childhood. That's why we're exploring manifestation as surface strategy versus scarcity as a trauma pattern. This distinction is essential because an early life scarcity of love or a lack of other survival resources conditions you to default to that setting. Even when things are going well, underneath, there's still a persistent sense of unsafety. And it feels timely because the developments in the war in the Middle East are currently stirring the scarcity and lack trauma individually and collectively around the world. Welcome to Inner Integration. I'm Meredith Miller, and this is why manifesting isn't working, the trauma behind scarcity and lack. What is the scarcity mindset? Being prepared is a good thing, so we can keep on living and knowing that if something happens, like a shortage of water, food, or other resources, we're prepared. But when we become preppers, we move into a survival state driven by fear and hypervigilance. And there is no amount of food, water, and toilet paper that's going to feel like safety and security to a person who is stuck in this state. Because the opposite of scarcity isn't always about having an abundance of resources. When it comes to lack and scarcity, there's something here that's bigger than money, love, support, or other resources. Scarcity isn't just what's missing outwardly. It's usually an inner atmosphere that feels like there's not enough time, not enough support, not enough love, not enough room to exhale and relax. And that inner atmosphere shapes your perception. So life becomes filtered through the anticipation of insufficiency, not having enough. Then the nervous system gets stuck in hypervigilance, scanning mode as a survival mechanism, anticipating danger, threat, loss, what may not come, what may leave, what you might fail to keep, or who might try to take what you have. The scarcity mindset is both a fear and a protective behavior to avoid feeling the deeper insecurity. And again, this applies to the invisible as much as the material resources. If you expect less from people in life, you might feel safer because you need or want less. Yet this defense mechanism is also blocking your prosperity. If you brace in life to protect yourself from disappointment, your whole system tightens. And in the state of tightening, it's hard to receive, to trust, to ask, to rest. And this isn't a failure or a judgment or a blame. It's a trauma adaptation that comes from a learned sense of unsafety. A couple episodes ago, I mentioned this bracing pattern, which I noticed in my sacrum, in my lower back. We can't hear the signal when we're bracing for the noise. Perhaps you experienced deprivation or unpredictability of love and other resources in childhood. That could be material. It could have been poverty, not knowing when the next meal was coming or where it was coming from. It could have been a situation of sudden loss where maybe your family had a good financial standing and then suddenly it was all lost. Or maybe it's much more invisible. Like maybe sometimes you could count on love and support, and other times not at all. That tends to correlate to a disorganized attachment. Or maybe you could never count on that and you felt utterly alone in the world. So that state of bracing and tension was a strategy meant to protect you from lack, yet at the same time recreating it. The old scarcity trauma was repeating on loop. And that can show up in defense mechanisms in adulthood. You might notice things like withholding, guardedness, controlling, overgiving, settling for less, grasping, self isolating, or a protective stance of assuming that there isn't enough or you won't get enough, or maybe that even stops you from asking for help or support. Your manifestation isn't failing because you're bad at mindset work or you're bad at manifestation. It's failing because of unresolved scarcity trauma that keeps resetting your system to the default program, which is scarcity. So the deeper exploration isn't just why do I experience scarcity? And the deeper work isn't just about using your willpower to make the conscious decision to change your thoughts from scarcity to abundance. It's what does scarcity help me avoid feeling? And the deeper work begins with what am I afraid will happen if I feel that? Maybe it's disappointment, dependence, vulnerability, hope, grief, longing, hopelessness, or maybe something else. And remember, we have to feel it to heal it, but we don't have to get stuck in the feelings. And we can't transmute the trauma by stuffing it down and distracting ourselves with all kinds of forms of escapism and false security. When you sit with the feeling of lack and scarcity, what particular ways does this show up for you in your life? When scarcity becomes identity, maybe you imagine something you want in life. Could be love, family, community, support, money, success, health, peace, fulfillment. Does it feel safe to want that? And if it doesn't, Perhaps it wasn't safe to want anything in childhood because it often led to disappointment. Then maybe those experiences continued repeating through adulthood. And over time, disappointment becomes a heavy burden of exiled grief carried in the heart. Hope deferred makes the heart sick because the heart wants to dream, it wants to love, to live, to enjoy, to receive, to give, to express. But when that movement instead is gripping and self restrained, it ironically keeps you in the grief of lack and longing. So there's a tension there in the conflict, and that feeling is painful. So perhaps you notice that you start making up stories about why you don't have whatever it is that you'd like to have or think you should have. And those stories often have a blame or a self blame tone. And usually the blame coin flips back and forth because it restores a false sense of control and agency to avoid feeling unsafe. There's a primary grief here. It's not just disappointment. It's repeated disappointment that teaches the heart that the act of wanting anything could be dangerous. So the nervous system and body contract around desire and dreaming. It becomes restraining, gripping, explaining, lowering expectations, generating narratives of blame or self-blame. All of these are coping mechanisms, a form of control to temporarily alleviate the feeling of unsafety. And the painful intelligence of that mechanism is totally understandable. When you restrain yourself, you don't risk rejection. When you grip, you abate the threat of loss. When you over explain, you try to control the narrative. And when you lower your expectations, you don't get your hopes up and risk disappointment. Stories of blame or self blame can feel more bearable than helplessness because blame creates an illusion of control. If it's your fault or someone else's fault, then at least the world becomes more legible and you can create a sense of solid ground. But the deeper ache is more vulnerable. I wanted something and it didn't arrive or it didn't work out. And underneath that helplessness is the identity story that's keeping you locked in a state of lack and scarcity. What do you tell yourself about yourself when that happens? Is it safe to dream bigger? I always ask my clients, even those who have already done years of healing work, what do you really want to create in life? And what I find is that most people freeze. They say, I don't really know. It's like a blank screen in their mind. Or they tell me something really small because their heart doesn't feel safe to dream bigger. They'll say something like, well, I just want to be able to pay bills, to feed, clothe, and educate my kids. And there's nothing wrong with that. But limiting your dream of life to mere survival is a remnant of childhood and ancestral trauma. Maybe a lot of you can relate to that. What's most present here is the heart's tension, because that's where the conflict exists in the body. The conflict is between the heart's natural movement versus the protective scaffolding around it, which is limiting the movement, yet seemingly keeping you safe. In childhood, that protection was intelligent. It likely once kept you from drowning in a sea of unmet need and what you learned to believe that all of that meant about you. But now it might also be keeping that grief stagnant rather than moving because part of you still wants to dream, to receive, love, express, enjoy, and participate in life. Yet another part of you associates that kind of openness and trust with heartbreak and disappointment. So it converts into longing and rational analysis about why you can't have what you want. And it bypasses the grief with energetic control, whatever that defensive scaffolding is for you, so you don't have to feel the pain. When you imagine giving yourself permission to dream bigger, what's the instant rebuttal that you hear in your mind? Do you notice that perhaps you're blaming yourself or someone else? Blame and self-blame aren't the core wound here. They're part of the protective scaffolding built around the more unbearable experience of having no way to make something happen, no way to secure what's needed, no way to protect the heart from not being met, and no way to co-regulate in an atmosphere of absence. So those stories aren't random distortions. They're an attempt to restore agency where there once was none. Even painful certainty can feel safer than vulnerable powerlessness. And that's where a lot of people get stuck in the victimhood of scarcity and lack. There's a protective intelligence to blaming and self-blaming, but this habit is also blocking you from having what you really want. It's blocking you from even dreaming about what you want. And having what you want isn't really about having something external. It's more about feeling how you want to feel. What we have externally is all just temporary. So the illusion is what we want to have. The truth is more about what we want to feel when we have what we want to have. There's something really tender underneath all of this. The scarcity pattern isn't usually driven only by lack itself, but by the resistance of feeling helplessness. Helplessness is often the feeling that the nervous system and the subconscious most wants to override. That's because it often triggers the old humiliation carried by the heart, and that pain was devastating. I couldn't have what I needed because something's wrong with me, and I had to bury that pain to keep going. When you notice the blaming or the self-blaming stories begin, what feeling do they seem to arrive just in time to cover up? What do you not have to feel as long as you go into your mind, into those stories of blaming and self-blaming? And notice how your body tightens to brace just before the helplessness fully arrives. That can create an automatic defensive reflex to explain or to place blame in order to maintain control and not allow the feeling to surface. And that resistance makes sense. The system is trying to preserve dignity, coherence, even the false type, in some sense of inner leverage or power. The mind then moves quickly with the story, so you don't have to feel the nakedness of the vulnerability or ride the roller coaster of unmet longing without a handlebar. So here's where manifestation can lead you astray. Most manifestation content is about shifting your conscious mind from lack to abundance to get what you want. And the premise is that if you keep repeating enough with your conscious mind, your subconscious will eventually get on board. And that can be effective sometimes. It's important to know how to redirect your mind away from focusing on what you don't want so you can focus your attention and energy on what you do want to grow in your life. But do you notice though, how when you try to do that, it's like there's this gravitational pull to the fear, to the lack, or whatever it is that you don't want anymore? The challenge is that when you're dealing with conscious mindsets and subconscious programs that are deeply embedded in unresolved trauma, your system will keep defaulting to the trauma programming as soon as your muscle of willpower gets tired. For most people, that's about 15 seconds. Try it. What's bothering you in your life right now? Imagine that the exact opposite is happening. It's amazing. So, for example, if you're worried about money, imagine that you won the national lottery, or you got that promotion that you really want, or you signed the big business deal. And imagine what your life looks like in that desired reality. How many seconds can you hold the dream before your worries and fear interrupt your imagination? That's the unresolved trauma of lack and scarcity. The shorter the time you can hold a positive imagination, the more unresolved trauma you have around that. That's why the same patterns and loops keep repeating, and not just in your personal life, but also you'll notice this in your family lineage. Have you ever realized that there are uncanny stories that seem to repeat generation after generation in some kind of way, even when people try to fix it? Dr. Benjamin Hardy wrote a book called Willpower Doesn't Work. And he challenges the belief of hustle culture and most of the personal development industry that says willpower is the key to transformation. You just change your mind, you make a new decision. But Dr. Hardy's conclusion is that you actually have to change your external environment and implement structured systems so you don't have to keep relying on pure muscle to white knuckle through life. Dr. Hardy is spot on about changing the environment so you don't have to keep trying to override it with your willpower. Yet in my niche, working with survivors of generational trauma who want to transform their pain into purpose, changing the environment involves several layers, some of which are internal. So, how do we create an environment that supports abundance so we can do that inner work on the trauma integration? There's some key areas of our inner and outer world that are essential to rebuilding after the trauma of scarcity and lack. So, I want to walk through some of these so you can start to cultivate a more abundant environment before we go deeper into the core wound and how it's connected with the trauma of scarcity and lack in the next episode. First, tune out or get rid of all the toxic social influences in your life. These are probably the family members and friends who don't want to see you doing well. They don't want to see you feeling joyful, making money, contributing to others, and living your purpose. You will know them by their fruits. Some people say that true friends are the ones who stick with you when you're down. I say you won't really know who your true friends are until you actualize your higher potential, because your fake friends will be the first to try to tear you down or get you to commiserate with them. This is, by the way, why support groups will become toxic over time, because people are still focused on repeating the same stories of pain and injustice. Not because these stories aren't true, but because telling the same story over and over and over again without leaning into the discomfort of doing the inner healing work is just going to keep you in the pain and victimhood. It's going to require a lot of willpower to override negative messaging in your environment. And all of that energy loss is energy that you're not using to build your dream, to heal yourself, to actualize your purpose. And it can feel comfortable because it's resonating with the parts of you that are still in pain. Yet remember the gravitational pull of the black hole. The same goes for the social influences you expose yourself to online, whether you know those people in person or not. Surround yourself with people in person and online who genuinely cheer for you and feel inspired by what you're creating, and that you can also cheer for and feel inspired by. Maybe you want to get mentors and coaches who will help you heal and actualize your higher potential, who will help you see the things that you can't see about yourself. But be careful, because there's a lot who will just validate your pain and keep you focused on the injustice. And that may feel really good at first, but it's not going to help you in the long run. And there's plenty of them out there who may seem supportive, but are actually working behind the scenes to destroy you. All of that will reinforce the scarcity and lack. Who in your life doesn't really want to see you happy, healthy, wealthy, and doing well? Second, Remove the signs of scarcity and lack in your temple and bring in new energy. Look around your house or apartment. If it's a mess, that's a sign that you're not taking good care of yourself. And this is very common post trauma. Tidy your house up every day, even if you tell yourself that you don't have the energy. You'll find the energy once you get going. You're going to be so much happier when you're sitting on your sofa looking around at a beautiful space than when everything's a disaster around you. Do a good scrub once a week and get a deep clean once a month. Don't neglect your closets and drawers because that's where you stuff everything that you want to hide and not deal with. Get rid of stuff you don't use anymore. Get some organizational tips from YouTubers or blogs. There's a lot of those great channels nowadays. Put a system in place so that cleanliness becomes your new normal and notice how different you feel in that space. Look in your refrigerator and cupboards. Are there signs of real food? Or a bunch of junk, old leftovers, bottles of condiments with no nutritional value? Or worse yet, are they empty? That will tell you a lot about how you treat yourself because your body is the temple of your soul. What are you feeding yourself? Do you prioritize time to prepare healthy, nutritious, whole foods? Put fresh, colorful fruits in a bowl on your countertop so they're always there to help you see these signs of abundance. And remember, you can always grab a healthy snack. Get food that's as clean as possible and organic if you want to prioritize money towards your health. Illness is much more expensive than organic food. Move your body at least 30 minutes a day. Find some kind of exercise, fitness, or even walking that you enjoy. Or even if you have to, turn on the television and watch something while you're doing exercise at home. Figure out a way to get it done. Find something that you can motivate yourself to do because a stagnant body stagnates the mind and emotions too. And stagnation is a state of scarcity and lack. When you move your body, you shift your mind, you get your emotions flowing again. Plus, it's very important for your physical health. And I know some of you might be rebuking this right now, saying you can't afford the money, the time, or whatever other excuse your creative brain came up with. We all say that we can't afford things when these excuses usually mean it's just not a big enough priority right now. I can't afford it is a scarcity and lack program. Even if you don't want to prioritize it right now, at least start by being more honest with yourself by saying, this isn't a priority for me right now. Be honest with yourself and don't limit your possibilities. Also, this should go without saying, but I see a lot of jealousy out there. If you put someone down or wish them bad, even in your own mind without saying it out loud, when you see someone earning money, getting a promotion, or otherwise doing well, you're not just projecting your jealousy on them, you're limiting your own abundance. Buddhists say that hatred is drinking poison and expecting your enemy to die. It's the same with envy and jealousy. Wish people well, even in your own mind, and see how that energy sows your fields of abundance. And if this is difficult for you, that's revealing that you need to work on releasing resentments because you're becoming bitter. That's part of your state of scarcity and lack. Post-trauma takes a huge toll on our bodies, our emotions, our minds, and our physical temple at home as well. It'll be much easier to heal and actualize your higher potential when you feel great in your meat suit, when you discipline your wicked mind, and when you cleanse your emotional wishes and desires, when your home feels like an abundant environment too. Even when your bank account or social circle doesn't reflect abundance yet, you'll be living in a physical, mental, and emotional environment that's supportive to generating more finances and healthier social connections. Next, detox the field of your soul. Professor Jang, who predicted the war with Iran a couple years in advance, gives fascinating lectures on what's happening now in the world. On the surface level, there's the kinetic war. But on a deeper level, the holy war isn't just about the battles between religious fanatics. It's also about hijacking your attention. Jung said, the war isn't about money, energy, or power. The real currency in the world is human consciousness. And when you understand this idea, you understand everything. This war is being fought to control the consciousness of the human race because it's our consciousness that creates reality itself. It's a war for the soul of humanity. Everything that you read, listen to, and watch is imprinting your consciousness. So, content that generates fear, envy, wrath, lust, pride, gluttony, sloth, and greed is harvesting your energy and exposing you to more spiritual warfare. Take a look at your subscriptions on social media and the other media that you expose yourself to. What are they adding to your life? Is it creative or destructive? Is it helping you grow or keeping you in the lower frequency emotions that are feeding the demons? It's not your fault if you grew up in an environment of scarcity and lack. It's not your fault if you grew up in an abusive family where you were programmed to be a victim to spiritual warfare or to sell little pieces of your soul to get something that you thought you needed or wanted. But it is your responsibility to save your soul now if you want to be free. What are you allowing to influence your soul? And are you waiting for a rescue fantasy, for someone or something else to come save your soul? Get in alignment with your creator. Manifestation culture often teaches distortions like you're the creator or you're God. From my perspective, this is identity distortion and it creates a terrible tension. Because when you aren't manifesting what you want and you're God or you're the creator, then the only other explanation is something's wrong with you. That'll trigger some core wounds and lead to self-blame, which keeps you in the helplessness and locked out of the abundance of your birthright. Your creator wants you to be abundant. But when our relationship and alignment with God is severed or distorted, we run into some common pitfalls of scarcity and lack. And on the flip side, pride, entitlement, and greed. You can force manifestation with your willpower. You can manifest an entire empire from ego, and it might work for a while. But inevitably, what's built on ego will self-implode, and you can lose everything. Many entrepreneurs will tell you that story of their great reckoning when they felt deeply humbled by an event or a chain of events that broke them. If you're lucky, you'll have the inner reckoning first due to some kind of relational or worldly event that gets your attention. And when that event can pierce your perception and you can get your ego in right relationship with divine will, you'll remember that you're a co-creator in this life and that the creator of all that is your source of everything. That inner path will require choosing to let go of what's not aligned with your spirit and divine mission. And you might be really attached to some of that stuff. You'll know because when you have a relationship with God, you'll feel called to make those decisions instead of the decisions guided by ego. And when you do make decisions from ego, because we're all humans and we're going to do that sometimes, you can quickly recognize it and get yourself back in alignment with divine will. But when you're still under the influence of pride and self-righteousness, it's likely you won't hear the calling because you can't hear the signal through the noise. The ego makes a lot of noise. Speak with your creator as a father or a friend. Probably your relationship with God has a similar tone as your relationship with your own father. If there was scarcity and lack in that relationship, there will likely be the same in your relationship with God. The more you heal that childhood imprint, the more abundant your relationship with God will be. And I'm talking about a relationship, not religion. One is a connection, and the other is a cult. If your father was absent or abandoned you, deep down you probably feel abandoned and forsaken by God. If your father was abusive, you probably feel like God is punishing you or wants to harm you. If your father betrayed you, you probably feel like at some level God betrayed you. If your dad was terrifying, you probably fear God or feel like fearing God is loving God. If your dad didn't provide for you, you probably feel like God isn't providing for you. If your dad was emotionally unavailable, you probably feel like God didn't hear you or doesn't care about you. And if God was dead in your family, you probably made something else your God. Your intellect, money, status, fame, or your own ego. Religion doesn't give you a connection with God. Plenty of religious people are horrible humans. That's because religion gives you dogma and beliefs, not a relationship. You have to work to create a relationship. And of course, you can separate the wheat from the chaff to find the gems of wisdom in any dogma, but your authentic relationship and alignment with your creator starts in your heart, not in a book. That's why the scarcity and lack from trauma can distort and disrupt our relationship with the creator of all that is, who is our source of everything. The crazier things get in the world, the more we're being called to get in right relationship with God and to get our desires in order. For me, this was part of the post 2020 reckoning. Reading Dante Alighieri's Divine Comedy was so helpful in this process because he writes about disordered desires and all the distorted ways that we go about loving and seeking love through pride, envy, lust, gluttony, wrath, greed, and sloth in ways that we don't even realize. The body is the foundation in the physical world, and the spirit is the foundation in the spiritual world. When the body feels unsafe, we either escape into substances, other physical substances and substitutions, or we escape into the mind and check out entirely through dissociation or fantasy or the intellect. Disconnection is perceived by the nervous system as unsafe, a threat, or danger. When we're disconnected from the body, we're disconnected from the physical world where our dreams become form. So that process is delayed and distorted. And when the spirit feels unsafe or we don't know it exists, we escape into materialism, leaving our inner connection to our spirit severed. And that leads to the spiritual disconnection from the creator of all that is. You're never alone, even when no one else is there for you, even in the worst moments of your life. God has always been there for you, even through all the suffering and lack. But when we're disconnected, that feeling of being alone in the world, that's a dire place to be. When we're spiritually disconnected, we also lack the infinite abundance and wisdom of God to co-create our dreams. In the next episode, I want to walk you one layer deeper to discover where scarcity meets your core wound. We've explored a bit about how scarcity isn't only about missing resources externally or having unmet needs, and how this same protection stance can leave you stuck in the very conditions that it's trying to prevent, leaving you feeling restrained, guarded, burdened, cut off from fuller receiving of abundance or actualizing your potential. The deepest sting in that chain reaction is often the conclusion that we draw about ourselves, what it means about who we are. This is what starts to uncover the core wound, which was imprinted at conception and then reinforced during life experiences that we use as evidence to support that conclusion. It's going to be a good one. Don't miss it. And in another episode in the future, we're going to explore in the gap. I want to give you some time to process and implement the insights from this episode and the next one. And as we continue to explore some other topics in upcoming episodes, before we jump into the gap, once you start cultivating the inner abundance of worthiness and safety, you might find that there's a gap between your inner knowing and the outer confirmation. I'm hearing from quite a few people lately who are at this stage in their process and feeling frustrated by the perceived delay of the arrival of external abundance. When reality doesn't yet mirror back what feels true inside, or at least not on the timeline that we're expecting, the mind starts searching for a reason. And that delayed reciprocity can awaken old self-doubts when you know inwardly, but you don't fully trust the inner knowing when the outer world is still silent. There's a delay between that new level of inner alignment and the outer confirmation. That's where we're confronted with the test. Can you maintain the faith while the external evidence hasn't arrived yet? In that gap is where an enormous amount of growth can happen. Or it's a temptation to go back to the old ways of instant gratification, ego-based manifestation, and trauma-based dopamine loops. In that episode, we'll explore some questions that will help you stay rooted in what's true without abandoning yourself in the waiting. If this message speaks to your soul, make sure to subscribe or follow wherever you listen to podcasts. Share this with someone else in the path, someone who's ready to go deeper beyond the surface of healing and into true integration, beyond the personal and into the ancestral, collective, and planetary layers too. And if you'd like to leave a message or a note for me, something that resonated, something you want to hear more about, you can leave a comment here, or you'll find a link in the show notes where you can send me a private message. Remember, keep listening within. No more playing small. It's time to remember who you are because the world needs your wholeness now more than ever. You are not the wound. You are the medicine. Let your trauma become your map to purpose. Thank you for joining me today for this transmission of the Inner Integration podcast. You're not broken, you're not behind, and your trauma wasn't a detour, it was initiation, an immersion into the very wisdom that your soul came here to embody. To go deeper into this work, visit innerintegration.com. And until next time, big hug to you.